This chapter on economic development is also very dense, and unfortunately, we're just going to talk about a couple important concepts and terminology. The book starts out talking about economic development as the relationship between the standard of living of a country and how it is reflected in the economic of that country. So the author also begins to talk about how researchers began to look at this idea of countries who had a low standard of living and how they were primarily countries that had subsistence agriculture, and so that with hopefully the development of new technologies and skills, agriculture would change and the standard of living would increase. We used to talk about economic development as first world countries, second world countries, and third world countries. Today, we use the term developed and developing. So the gross domestic product is an indicator of economic development, and it's just one indicator that we use, and it's the total value of all goods and services produced in a region or a country. A country with a high gross domestic product is considered a developed country. A country with a low gross domestic product is considered a developing country. So we can also look at industries as primary industries, secondary, tertiary industries. And a primary industry is basically an industry where natural resources are extracted, as in timber, fishing, mining, farming, and the resource is removed and sent somewhere else as is. There's no turning lumber into logs or turning fishing into canned fish. It's the raw product, and these are mostly activities of developing countries. Secondary industries are industries where some value has been added to that resource, and this is a major stage in human development. It's kind of the development of industries and manufacturing. In the United States, about 15% of our industry is involved in this secondary industry, or 15% of our activities. We see the more countries using or being able to manufacture as a result of globalization, so that the country itself hasn't really reached this higher level of development without the input of other countries and the provision of the host country with cheap labor and less strict environmental and safety laws. With secondary industries, you see the need for developing infrastructure, so factories, roads, connections, water, till how to get rid of byproducts of an industry. And this is a very kind of uneven development. You see regions of secondary industry where you might have a core of development and then periphery. However, we've really noticed a global shift with deindustrialization in some areas and multinational corporations relocating their core, absolutely a result of globalization. So countries can have different components of their manufacturing in 10 different countries, where the final elements are brought together and put together in one country. So in the United States, we used to have this industrial belt up in the Northeast, which was close to iron resources and water for shipping and water for manufacturing. And today, that is a very abandoned kind of rust belt part of the country. And much of the industry is in other areas, for instance, this Nike factory in Korea. We also, the very first video you all talked about was in an opera and the development of maquiladoras. So these are places where migrant or industries have developed assembly plants for workers. 20% of the Mexican industry is involved in these activities, and it might be a U.S. country or a U.S. company in another country, and with poor working environments, low wages, and safety regulations that would be very different from the U.S. And some people think about this as a new idea for colonization. So we have invested in this periphery where the core and the headquarters of industry might be in the United States, and the actual manufacturing is happening somewhere else. So the noise, the pollution, and cheap labor is happening, but the profit still flows back to the United States or the host country. Tertiary activities are the development of transportation, communication, utilities, and they connect the product to the consumer. And so this is kind of the distribution of goods and services, and you're not really producing anything, but you're just moving products from one place to another. So 18% of U.S. economics are involved in these kinds of activities. And you can just see the huge landscapes that are developed around trucking or around seaports, and then think about environmental considerations that have to happen to support those industries. The fourth type of economic activity is called quaternary, and these are specialized services, information, and exchange of money, so insurance, banking, retail, wholesale, processing and manipulation of information, so the whole virtual world and computer age. And 65% of U.S. activity is involved in these kinds of resources. And these are the landscapes of quaternary industries, of high-rise buildings. This happens to be in Brazil, or Rio, yeah, in Rio. Singapore, Seoul, Korea, and Chicago. Also in quinary, then there's the last economic activity are decision makings in corporations. So these are governments, health, tourism, and 10% of the United States is involved in those kinds of activities. So if we look at the U.S., as a percentage, we still produce a lot of the world's goods and services, but as far as our economy and where our money comes from, most of our money is coming from information, and very little from resources, although the resources that are extracted are no longer from the U.S., they're often from other countries. So that's just a really dramatic rush to give you a little bit of the economic chapter, and then we will finish up next week talking about cities.